Dr. Bhagat Singh had a charisma. Once you talked to him, he was an excellent orator, excellent man who could make you follow your life into spirituality, how to reach him, how to reach the God.
And I was a little bit embarrassed when we were all together in public because people always stared at him. Back in those days, hardly anybody had ever seen a Sikh before.
The British Secret Service spied on my father for over 18 years on his activities here in the United States.
There's a Supreme Court case named Finn that is asking, what is white? The Supreme Court issues their argument that somehow everyone in America has the same idea about race. That we all get up in the morning, open our eyes, and see the same thing.
My father basically had a fairly simplistic life, living on a farm on a small village outside of Amritsar. They raised livestock.
Dr. Singh belonged to a family of workers, farmers, military people in India.
My father was raised primarily by his father, Bhagat Singh, because his mother passed away when he was only 3 years old. He went to high school and he went to college at Khalsa College. It's considered the best college in northern India. His father encouraged him to further his education no matter where it would be.
He finished his education as a bachelor's in college, but he wanted to study abroad. Came to the country early days in 1913.
My father's first quest was to come to the United States because he first of all, he loved the works of the American philosophers, Emerson, Whitman, and Thoreau. When my father first came to the United States, he worked in several lumber mills. In the Hammond Lumber Mill, which is in Astoria, Oregon. It was right next to the Columbia River.
And when he came to the country, it was not easy for him. Being a racial bias, he might have to work harder than somebody else to keep the job.
There was a series of houses that they lived in, 4 Hindus or Sikhs per house, and this is how we lived. They cooked their own food there. During that time, he took colleges at Berkeley. Was to become an attorney. And to become an attorney in the United States, you needed to be a citizen at that time.
After he went to school, got his PhD, and motivated himself more towards theology and the spiritual science.
When he went into the Army in 1918, they tried to get him to shave his beard and remove his turban, and he convinced the captain at that time that not to do so. It was part of his religion. The Sikhs always wear their turban, and they never shave their beard. He was very true to that.
He was the first Indian to be in the U.S. Army, World War I, and there he was with his black beard. I thought that was very important to him and to all of us.
At that time, anybody who goes to the army of any country to fight for the country is usually admitted as a permanent resident of the country.
Dr. Thind came to United States in 1913. Ghadar movement started in April 1913 in Oregon. The main objective, get freedom for India.
He became part of that, and eventually he became the secretary for Oregon. And he lectured all through Oregon and Washington on the advantages of getting the British out of India.
Thind's involvement in the Ghadar Party, which was an organization in the U.S. of South Asians that believed in the liberation of India from British rule.
And he used to fight for the independence of India. There's a Ghadar party in this country which he used to work hard to motivate the general public. In this country, India must be given independence.
He felt that the British had no place in India. A lot of things that even happened to his father. And he spent almost 8 years in jail as a subversive to the British rule.
And within a short period of time, it became the sought after a revolutionary paper.
He advocated only a peaceful means, though.
In the East Coast, there were people believing in Gandhi's style of movement, while in the West Coast, which was saying that we have to get freedom with the force of arms.
He was not comfortable with the direction they were heading, and several of their members were put in jail, several were executed when they went back to India.
It was risky when he applied for citizenship. Immigration people brought this question that he has taken part in the Ghadar movement.
There was an inherent risk for my father at that time because he was trying to apply for his citizenship.
He doesn't use his last name here.
October 9, 1918, the form actually says insert name, Christian name first. It's a kind of a limiting form. Oh, yeah. I have previously made petition for citizenship. If so, it was granted, and then the federal court at Portland, Oregon, 1919, it was then taken away according to decree given by the Supreme Court of the United States. Please read Thind versus U.S. He tells the naturalization examiner how many people can refer to a Supreme Court case. He, though, is a thorough student and scholar.
Thind applied for citizenship the year that he served in the military in World War I in 1818 originally in the state of Washington. He actually was granted citizenship originally, and then it was revoked.
And that really intrigued me. What is it that made someone give him citizenship for 4 days and then take it away after 4 days?
Thind was being followed by the British government. All the intelligence that was supplied to American intelligence who was involved with the Ghadar movement, they did not want at any cost the Ghadar movement to succeed.
Your father's history has been very interesting. Another equally interesting bit of history is Mr. Tomlinson's history. He almost single-handedly seems to have dogged your father each step of the way.
Tomlinson, at the time, may have initially wanted to challenge and seek to overturn the naturalization of Thind for political reasons, thinking that somehow his activities in the Ghadar movement were un-American.
The court said that affiliation was not necessarily a positive one because it encouraged sort of violence against, or violence in revolution, rebellion.
Are you a believer in anarchy? Positively not. Do you advocate anarchy or the overthrow of the existing government in this country? Not at all. I like it. His character was way excellent.
Basically, that court case escalated from the district court to the Supreme Court of the United States.
There's a Supreme Court case named Thind that is asking, what is white? The Supreme Court issues their argument. It all comes down to the common understanding of the American people, that they all agree on what's white and what's not.
And the courts were deciding whether Indians are Caucasian or not.
The auspice of the statute required you either be white or you be black. There's no in between, and those are your only paths to citizenship.
Yeah, ineligible. Whenever we say ineligible, that's what they usually meant racially ineligible. Otherwise, they'd say lack of knowledge.
In those days, no Indian was given any preference. They were considered as second-class citizens of the country. They had to sit in the back of the buses.
The system told Din, you have to choose to be white or black. Which one are you going to choose? And if you're living in the US in the early 1900s, which one are you going to choose, right? There's one or the other. And so he chose white.
Don't take applications from anyone who's not white. Well, that's racist. Yes, he'd say, but the law is racist, and I'm here to enforce this law.
Din argued the tools that you should use to map me into the free white category are that I am an Aryan, I have pure blood, I have never been conquered, and that my language is Aryan.
He's making a larger argument in his cases, which is against the racial exclusion.
They see this man who has a turban, they see this man who has a beard, who has a certain political affiliation, and they understand him to be a certain way. So without saying it on paper, he is foreign to them because he has these beliefs, he looks a certain way, he's from a certain place.
From 100 years later, it kind of breaks your heart because you want him to stand up and say, I don't have to be white and I don't have to be black. I am good enough just the way I am.
He, by his briefs, to genuinely have respect and admiration for the Constitution of the United States, for the law of the country, truly desiring to be a citizen because it meant something to him personally and spiritually.
And the fact that he is denied, it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and then he is rejected. It's like the entire United States is saying, no, we don't want you.
I think the legacy of that case is in helping us to understand that race is a social construct and fluid over time, and that we're still grappling with a lot of those discussions and issues today.
Then luckily, the Congress passed a law. In 1936, all the honorable GIs must be given a permanent status of the country. So Dr. Singh was the first Indian to get a green card in 1936.
I think that in that story, he's a huge figure, partly because of his character.
He and myself, we were two Sikh-looking Sikhs then in Los Angeles at that time. He, really being a fatherly figure, motivated me to do something better.
Well, soon after he left Astoria and working in the lumber mills, he went on the road then doing his own lecturing on self-realization.
And he changed my life very, very differently. How to be oneness with him, how to lead a proper, a human life in this country or anywhere.
There was a great interest by Americans in Eastern philosophies. A few other people that were lecturing at this time, Yogananda, Paramahansa.
Paramahansa Yogananda was around at that time introducing people to yoga and some Eastern ideas. And those two men together really opened up Westerners' minds.
Well, maybe it's not that different now, but I think people were looking for something new. And when they heard him, he was a wonderful speaker. You wanted to know more about what he was telling people.
Back before the days of the internet and printers and all the modern conveniences we have, somehow he wrote up a flyer and got it printed, and he would stand in front of his place passing out flyers. And he was a really good writer and a really good marketer.
His advertising was generally done in the local paper. His lectures were on donation basis only. He had frustrating times. Sometimes when he first started out, there would be 5 or 6 people there.
These are difficult times. In earlier days, sometimes people looking at his picture didn't come, but he looked a little different.
And what kept him going was his knowledge that he and God are one.
He was teaching people basically the science of Satmat, which is how to connect the individual souls with their Creator. My father was a Sadguru. He was a realized human being, and he had the ability to do that.
And his teaching was so beautiful. Not only his lectures, I attended few, were so interesting. He would make you and lead you to the right path, that what life is about.
He taught people how to connect their own self with the God within.
One of his most beautiful teachings was, once you understand that you are an expression of God, talk about self-confidence and humility at the same time.
He had written many books to his credit on the spirituality, on the religion, on how to attain oneness with him.
My father taught a form of meditation basically that goes within. We're one, is one. But the only way to find that is inside you. And through his meditation practices, that's how you found it.
Now we shall all sit straight and spine straight, body relaxed, bending a little forward, hands on the knees and legs crossed. And the first breath is simple breath by bending the head low and putting the mind in the rectum. Deeply inhale through both nostrils, hold the breath, raise your head up and throat as far back as possible, and hold there until there is a strong pressure on the upper part of your spine and 2 good pulls on the liver and spleen. Then tip the head down and let your breath out to both nostrils. It's a good breath for liver and spleen. Watch the way it is done. It takes 5 to 7 years of regular practice. You've conquered the greatest curse, old age. Combine 2 things: corrective exercises with selective diet.
Mr. and Mrs. Davies used to attend the lectures. They were the ones, he told me the whole story. They were the ones who introduced their daughter to Dr. Singh. They fell in love. They fell in love, and their 2 children.
Well, I was about 5, I think, when my mother and father divorced, and not terribly long after that. She'd been going to his lectures, and they struck up a friendship, which turned into a romance, and they were married. I loved him from the minute I met him. He was just wonderful to me.
When my father and mother were together, they were like a young couple. They were laughing, they loved each other greatly, they were very affectionate toward each other.
To me, the love just jumps out of that picture at you. And that's the way it was with them.
I don't think I ever heard a cross word between the 2 of them.
It was a very good marriage. I never heard them argue once, ever. It's pretty unusual. I used to enjoy going into their bedroom every morning to watch him put his turban on. He did it with such finesse, and every pleat was perfect. And I used to love watching him do that. How many people get to do something like that? How many people have a father or a stepfather who puts on a special piece of clothing every morning that has such significance to it and puts it on so perfectly?
I know there was a little bit of stigmatism with my father marrying a white woman.
Just back then, people just had never seen a Sikh before.
When I was a child, there was times that I felt that I wish my father looked like everybody else.
People stared at him everywhere we went, which bothered me as a teenager, because as a teenager, you're more sensitive to everything. Well, I do remember that she had to drive herself to the hospital when she had David, because he couldn't drive. That always astonished me.
I never saw my dad drive a car. My mother drove the car. Generally take a taxi or a bus or a train. At that time, most of his travels were done by train.
I don't know whether we did so many things together because, you know, he wasn't home that much. He was constantly on lecture.
Unfortunately, my father's commitment was to his teachings. It wasn't easy, but his work came first. It wasn't that great for us because he was gone 9 months out of the year. I didn't understand that as a child.
That was his life, so couldn't do much about it. I used to ask my mother, didn't you miss him? He's gone all the time. And she did, but I think she was all right with it. My grandparents lived with us, so that she had a lot of support, because they were her parents.
Occasionally, my mother would take me to visit my dad where he was. I remember going to San Francisco 2 or 3 times, San Diego, Salt Lake. My mother and father were great parents. They provided for us. He would send most of his money from donations home on a weekly basis to my mother.
Without having to plead for it, I was able to go to probably the best girls' school in California and Stanford University. Of course, I've been grateful for it all my life.
Well, he was very well known. He didn't view himself as a celebrity at all. He viewed himself as a teacher of realization and truth. He became very successful. He traveled almost to every major city in the United States, go on a circuit and keep on that circuit every year. As he became more well known, the lecture halls became larger and larger and larger. And they were on a world tour at that time. My dad and mother went back to India in 1963. That was the first time since my dad came to the United States. He was greeted by dignitaries and stayed with Nehru and lectured in all the major universities in India with my mother. They were treated quite well there. My son and myself have been back to India twice. It was wonderful that we got to see our relatives that are still in Amritsar, in the small village. And we got to visit the same house my father grew up in and was born in. I felt my father's presence all during the time in his home. I could feel his presence. The vibration was wonderful there. He was still with us. He was still walking with us. He was still in the house that he was born in. And it was just a wonderful experience. The love that my father's family there, which was his two brothers, siblings.
My uncle Dr. Singh felt in his presence. I can't actually translate in words. I have never seen such a person in my life. People will think that he's my uncle, but he was not my uncle. He was a great soul I have ever met. And what contribution he has made in the struggle of freedom for the goodness of the humanity here in India and abroad, that was marvelous. And I am proud of him that he belongs to my family, and I still feel his presence in my life.
Thank you. Thank you. To grow up with a man of God, you feel it. You don't have to analyze it. It's a feeling that I always felt. Being next to him, I mean, you look into his eyes, you could see God, and that was special. I knew I had a different father.
My father-in-law gave me a book, and there I read about Dr. Bhagat Singh Thin, and I came to know in those days, what a marvelous achievement he has done. That is with beard and all Sikhi Saroop.
It was a shocking experience. I got a call from my grandmother. Now my dad passed away. It was very uncomfortable, knowing that he was in full good health. But I believe that, my father had a calling. It was quite a shock to the family and quite a shock to all his disciples at that time.
Shrimati Vivian Thind, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਡੇਵਿਡ ਭਗਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਥਿੰਦ, ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਜੈਸਟਨ ਥਿੰਦ, ਉਹ ਆਪਣੀ ਮਾਤਾ ਦੀ ਸੱਚੇ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਦੀ ਫੁੱਲ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਪਹੁੰਚੇ ਨੇ। ਆਪਣੀ ਭਾਰਤ ਦੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਤੇ ਅੱਧੇ ਫੁੱਲ ਆਪ ਦੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਅਨੁਸਾਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜੱਦੀ ਕਰਤਾਰਾਗੜ੍ਹ ਦੇ ਸੇਨ ਵਿਖੇ ਬਗੀਚੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾਏ ਜਾਣਗੇ। ਅੱਧੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਬਖਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਨਾਲ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਚੜ੍ਹਾਏ ਜਾਣਗੇ। ਸੱਚੇ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਦੀ ਮਹਾਨ ਆਤਮਾ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਚਰਨਾਂ ਬੋਲੇ ਸੋਹਣੇ ਹਾਲ ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ।
My father made a lot of money. He gave most of his money away. He put over 60 people through college.
And after that, I came to know that there is one scholarship which is being run in the Khalsa College.
He paid for their traveling from India here. Most of them were Indian students that went to Harvard and Stanford and so on. It's very generous.
I think if I had to push it into one word, I'd say enlightenment. He wanted everyone to live a good life. And experience the fact that that was making them a better person.
And so the individual person needs to find a way to find that God. How do you do that? You need a self-realized human being, a God-realized human being that could show you the way. And there's not many on this planet at any one time.
So I consider him as an immortal teacher which I ever saw in my life.